Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the September 8, 2020 regular meeting of the Common Council. Carrie, would you please call the roll?
Clark. Ms. Herbstreit. Mr. Hill.
Here.
Ms. McKiernan.
Here.
Mr. Sullivan.
Here.
Mr. Veach.
Here.
Mr. Wiley.
Here.
Mr. Willingham.
Here.
And Mayor Smith.
Here. We will now observe a moment of silence and be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Vice Mayor Hill. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have before us the minutes of the August 20, 2020 special meeting and August 25, 2020 regular and work session minutes. Unless there are edits, changes, or deletions, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilor Hill and a second from Councilor Herbstreit. Carrie, please call the roll.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Ms. Herbstreit.
Yes.
Mr. Hill.
Yes.
Ms. McKiernan.
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan.
Yes.
Mr. Veach.
Yes.
Mr. Wiley.
Yes.
Mr. Willingham.
Yes.
And Mayor Smith.
Yes. Report of the mayor. There is no report this evening, so I'll move along to the report of the city manager.
Thank you. We did open city buildings today, but citizens still have the option to skip the trip if they want to continue to slow down the spread of COVID. We're going to continue the drop boxes outside, or you can contact staff by phone or email. We also have many online services that have been launched and a webpage to provide a list of these services and staff contacts. Visit winchesterva.gov/reopening. And the public restrooms are now open on the splash pad at Long Street Mall. And we continue to watch the spotted lanternfly. It's still a growing issue in Winchester. We ask the community support in squashing the invasive insect when you see them and destroying the egg masses. Check your vehicle also. They tend to be hitchhikers and come along for the ride. There's information about what to do in Virginia Cooperative Extension website. Also, we continue to encourage folks to be accounted for on the 2020 census.gov. That's very important. And then last, you're all aware of the Valley Health and Anthem negotiations that are currently occurring. We did notify employees last Tuesday, as well as City Council, about the possibility that they could not come to an agreement on their contract. If that occurs, it would expire on 12/31/2020. That means that Anthem would be an out-of-network provider at Valley Health. So we continue to watch this, and we're working with other localities in the region to look at our options. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mary Beth. And I actually had a spotted lanternfly hitch a ride on my bike with me today. So it's pretty amazing. Now we'll have the report of the city attorney.
I have nothing at this time. Thank you, Mayor.
The next item we have on the agenda is public hearings. First public hearing is a request of Kim Craig for a conditional use permit under Code Section 5.1-2-8 to allow for a neighborhood convenience establishment at 1200 Valley Avenue, zone limited high-density residential. Mr. Hopkins isn't here, so we have Mr. Humans. If there are any questions or discussion items. Councilor Willingham.
I'm sorry, did you want to open the public hearing first? Did you want to do the public hearing first, and then I can speak?
Say that again, I can't hear you.
Did you want to have the public speak first?
Yes, sorry. Is there anyone in the public that would like to speak on this matter? Being none, Council Willingham?
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Thanks. So when I was reading the report, and then I know we got an email today as well in regards to this CUP request. I don't, Mr. Humans, I know we have very rarely looked at neighborhood convenience establishments. I think the only one that I'm aware of recently, maybe it's been a couple of years, was where Pizza Co. is. And I know that one we sort of got them to have some narrowly defined definitions. I know that was in a residential area just like this one it was. And we had a fair amount of conditions placed upon them. I understand from this application and from some of the discussions, obviously, that it seems to be a little bit more open-ended. I guess my concern is that, you know, given this location, given what this sort of wide open variety of opportunities to be used, that it's difficult for me to approve this as is. Not that I'm against what is trying to be potentially located here, but could be a meeting space, could be a restaurant, could be a personal service establishment, could be a retail store, could be a cafe bakery. And the whole purpose of the conditional use permit, at least in my mind, is that we would put conditions upon that application based upon the type of use. And so what I would probably request, and I'm not going to make a motion yet, but I'm going to make a motion at some point to table this, is to ask her to more narrowly define what the applicant eventually wants to do there. Because it's tough for me to support not knowing exactly what may go there. And I understand that she wants to be flexible, the applicant wants to be flexible in her opportunities here. But if there's a restaurant, you know, that could cause different things that we would want to look at. If it's a meeting space or whatever it may be, I just think that it's difficult for me to support something without any conditions, not knowing the exact use. So with that, at some point, I'm going to eventually make a motion to table, but I will defer to my colleagues for that conversation. Thanks.
Okay. Mary Beth, were there any comments received online?
No, sir.
Okay. For this, I will now close the public hearing. Is there any other discussion on this? Councilor Clark?
If I'm not mistaken, Mr. Willingham and peers, I thought the purpose of this motion for a zoning change was to broaden the possibility of uses so that future applicants would not have to come before this body. I think that was my understanding, at least, for the broad scope of the different possibilities for usage. This building has been several different entities, like a jewelry store, and I think maybe a palm or tarot card type of reader before. And it's my understanding that this was to broaden the use, not to more narrowly define the use, so that future owners or occupants could have the possibility of usage without having to come before this body.
Councilor Beach?
Thank you. Tim, this is being applied for under the neighborhood establishment or convenience establishment, and it lists, as Council Willingham said, you know, it could be a meeting space, restaurant, et cetera. If we get a refined use from the applicant, let's say as a bakery, they say it's going to be a bakery, and then we approve it, could then they switch to one of those others without coming back in front of us?
You want me to answer the questions now?
Yes.
Okay. So the most recent question there, yes, the intent is that they would be able to switch to one of those other uses as long as they adhere to the conditions that were listed, which at this point is just the hours of operation between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m., and that they take into consideration concerns of the neighbors. Those were the only two conditions that the Planning Commission attached to this when they forwarded it with a favorable recommendation. To be totally diplomatic, both Councilor Clark and Councilor Willingham are correct. In this specific instance, as Councilor Clark indicated, they did expand this list so that they would have the flexibility to do it and not have to come back to City Council. In regards to Councilman Willingham's comments, yes, we do normally have a very specific proposal wherein a conditional use is evaluated on the merits of the specific proposal with the specific conditions. So all of those comments are well taken. You do see the list of the 5 general categories of uses. In her letter, which I think many of you also received separately today, it's the same one that was in the packet from Kim Craig. She is specifically interested in the meeting space for up to 12 individuals. This is a very tiny building. It's only, I think, about 280 square feet. So it's going to be extremely limited. But if, for example, council has concern with the conditions being inadequate for a restaurant use that might attract a lot of people, she does want this operation for 7 days a week. So 7 o'clock in the morning, probably not so much of an issue, but 9 o'clock at night for a property that is otherwise, you can see here, there's a single-family residence in very close proximity. I can appreciate the concerns, but the applicant is specifically most interested in doing the meeting space.
Thank you.
Councilor Wiley.
Thanks, Mayor. Tim, thank you for the information. Could you clarify as to which is stated by her letter as personal service establishment? Did you know what that means in terms of the use?
Yeah, it's a term that's defined in our zoning ordinance, and that would include barbershops, beauty salons, nail salons, things that are on that order.
Okay. So that being said, and I'm in line with trying to learn more about what is the use, and then from there we can craft some conditions. I think typically we do conditions for the CUP based on, trash, potential loitering, idling vehicles, considering the density of this location and where it's located near a high school. I'm concerned about if it could be a retail store, selling alcohol or cigarettes or what may have you, based on being so close to the school. I am concerned there. I would like to know more about how, what exactly she's looking for. Meeting space, understandable, but if we could craft something that kind of fine tunes this a little bit more in terms of what the use is going to be, I think it'd be prudent for us to then craft the CUP language behind it. And I think we have typical boilerplate ones that we've done before, Tim. I don't know how many we've done CUP-wise in terms of the business uses, et cetera. But that would help, I think, allay a lot of the neighbors' concerns. I think if we get ahead of it now, then we won't have this work with the neighbors afterwards. I think we can work together on this with the applicant and the neighbors and how we can be constructive. Thank you.
Councilor McKiernan.
Similar to Councilor Wiley's concerns, I'm concerned with it sitting so close to Hanley High School. What would be available through a convenience store, retail store? I'm also, would they be able to have any live events in the parking lot, anything along those lines, or would that be not an option to them due to that location?
I want to check with our zoning administrator, but I believe anything on the outside of the building would require additional scrutiny. With the Pizzoco Pizza establishment up at 501 North Loudon Street, you, council, evaluated the outdoor seating area and specified that it could only be 10 foot by 20. As an example, that applicant had a condition associated with that pizza restaurant convenience operation that they could only have a 10 by 20 area, and they had to have review every year by the zoning administrator and had to come back to city council for reapproval in 3 years. So as it turns out, the operator wants to expand the outdoor seating area, particularly during COVID, and so he will be coming back anyway. But yes, to Councilor Willingham's comments, typically there's a lot more conditions associated with a specific conditional use, particularly if it involves something that might be of a potential nuisance to the neighbors with regard to noise, odors, dust, vibration, things like that.
Councilor Hurst.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Tim. I think I want to commend the intentions of the applicant and you, Tim, to bring something forward that can keep it from, if it changes in some way, it doesn't have to keep coming back to council. So I think, the efforts to do that are, I get it and I appreciate that. But I think in this you know, our goal is to make sure that whatever ends up there has minimal impact to the neighborhood or complements or supports that neighborhood. So with that in mind, I as well think that it would be beneficial for us to look at, you know, those different uses and putting some conditions specifically around those uses to ensure that whatever does end up being there will be a complement, a support to the neighborhood. So I as well would support, I think what Councilor Willingham has said and others, to do some more work on this. Thank you.
Councilor Hill?
Thank you. Tim, I don't recall, since I've been on council, that we've ever had a TUP request like this. Has there been one before?
No, I don't believe there's been one that hasn't been specific.
Okay, so this would be a first one, if we were approved, something like this. Yeah, all right. I too am a little concerned about the multiple uses of it and not knowing specifically what specifications we need to have for those different businesses if they change, you know, whether it's this one owner or if she sells the business to someone else or something. So I'm a little concerned too. Thank you.
One option that council has available to it is to modify the draft motion for approval to limit it just to the specific meeting space proposal that she's asked for in her letter and not include the other 4 uses there, the restaurant use, the convenience service establishment, retail store, and cafe bakery. That is an option, but I'm sensing that council feels like we need to look at potentially identifying more possible conditions, even with that one use.
So Tim, with the request for the multiple uses, if she had presented this as possible event space, then that would have sort of encompassed several of these, but not all of them. Because an event space, you can use it for, there's several different uses within an event space. But for this particular item here, this is, it doesn't seem like she really has a clear idea of what she wants to use it for. So, so from what I'm hearing from council is that they would like, and I'll come back to you. Yes, they would like a more clearer and concise usage for this space. Councilor Sullivan?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Tim. Based on what I'm hearing, it takes me back to Councilor Willingham's original point where we need some more information, because if we were to do a meeting space, which is what it sounds like the applicant prefers, I'm really not in favor of that. It's a 280 square foot building. We're in the middle of COVID. So, I mean, how many people could you even put in the building safely, practically, profitably, you know, in a building that small? So I think we would definitely, just based on that alone, need some more information about, you know, what type of meeting space. I mean, that would put her almost in a worse position, given the current circumstances, than, you know, not doing all of it. So I tend to agree with, sounds like the majority of council on this one. So.
And to respond to that, so the first one there would be considered a assembly use under building code. The other ones would probably be more mercantile use codes, and there's a big difference in terms of things like handicap accessible restrooms and building code standards that apply to an assembly type of use under the building code, regardless of what our definitions are under zoning ordinance. So more clarity. I'm not sure that Ms. Craig understands what she may need to do in terms of enlarging the very small, substandard size restroom that's there that's not handicap accessible. She may go through this whole process and then find that it's not practical in terms of building code compliance.
is the pleasure of the body? Council Willingham, did you have another statement?
Yeah, well, I guess to that end, Melissa, would it be better just to, I mean, obviously continuing it for 60 days would give her some time, but it sounds like we're not sure exactly. Would it be better to table it indefinitely and let her come back with a modified application, or is there, obviously we need more information, so if she's gonna.
Question, because I can't hear you at all.
I said, would it be better for us to table it indefinitely and let her come back with a revised application, or should we just continue it for 60 days? Or is there a preference? I mean, is there a better way to do that? It seems like she's going to need to choose one of these and then have it go through staff, make some conditional, some potential conditions, and then have it for us to review. So is it better just to ask her to revise her application to start with and table it indefinitely, or what would be your recommendation?
I think the best process would probably be to table it and then allow her to come back to staff and work through whatever issues there are, so that then staff knows when it's in a good position to bring back to council, rather than setting maybe an artificial date and then it not be in a position where, council it's ready to be heard by council yet.
Okay.
So I think it should be just tabled indefinitely and let the applicant work through the process with staff, and then they can advise the city manager when it's ready to bring back before council.
Okay. Then I'll make a motion to.
Could I just do a point of order? The only concern I have, Melissa, is as a conditional use, I think council's obligated to a maximum time
Can't
frame.
hear you.
They're not?
I can't hear you.
Is council limited to a maximum time frame to table a conditional use permit? I thought that state code limited them to like 60 days or something.
I would say I can't recall if it's 60 or 90 days, but I would hope that she would work with staff to be able to. But we can advise her of that, what the time frame is, or she'll have to reapply.
And my only concern was the word indefinitely. Yeah.
Well, then I'll make a motion to table 2338 for up to the maximum amount of time per state code. And then with a caveat that if she wants to reapply earlier, once it's gone through staff review, then it can be brought back.
Second, Wiley.
I have a motion to table by Willingham and a second by Wiley. Carrie, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Ms. Herbstritt.
Yes.
Mr. Hill.
Yes.
Ms. McKiernan.
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan.
Yes.
Mr. Beach.
Yes.
Mr. Wiley.
Yes.
Mr. Willingham.
Yes.
And Mayor Smith.
Yes, and that item is tabled. The next item that we have, thank you, Tim. Have a good evening. The next item we have is the second reading, an ordinance to authorize the property acquisition of Wick Street as a public right-of-way at 700 Fairmont Avenue for use as a stormwater management pond, presented by Perry Eisenhart. Good evening, Perry.
Good evening. It's
How
good
are
to see
you?
you all in person. It's been a long
Good to
time.
see you as well.
I really don't have anything new to present tonight, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Are there any questions or discussions for Perry? Councilor Beach?
Public hearing on this?
Sorry. Thank you. This has been a long time since we've been back in this meeting, so. Is there anyone here that would like to speak on this item? There being none, I will close the public hearing.
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
Have a motion from Councilor Beach and a second from Councilor Clark.
Mayor, did we have any correspondence?
We did not.
Thank you. Just want to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. Carrie, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Ms. Herbstritt.
Yes.
Mr. Hill.
Yes.
Ms. McKiernan.
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan.
Yes.
Mr. Beach.
Yes.
Mr. Wiley.
Yes.
Mr. Willingham.
Yes.
And Mayor Smith.
Yes. That motion carries. The next item we have on the agenda is public comments. Now is the time on our agenda where anyone here who wishes to address council, you have 3 minutes. come to the podium, please state your name and address.
Is there a timer, or should I set my phone? Do we have a timer?
I can set mine.
Okay. I'll set mine too.
Carrie, let me know when you're ready.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm
Miss-
Danielle Bostic. Is it time?
Yes.
Okay, hold on, let me. All right, I'm Danielle Bostic. I'm at 1893 Clayton Ridge Drive. I have 2 points, both are about fire and rescue. So I've seen that there's some progress on the ESCI report, and I was happy to notice that since the report came out in April. It seems like some steps have been taken to address the public safety crisis, but it's going to be fairly futile to undertake these measures if you don't start with the very first step that the $45,000 study recommended, and that is to restore trust and communication with the fire department. Staffing a second person on the fire trucks through mandatory overtime is not a permanent solution, because until morale improves, you're going to continue to have staff leave faster than you can replace them. And until trust is reestablished, there's not going to be confidence on the part of the firefighters that the city will follow through. Trust is foundational. Can the firefighters trust the city to sustain the change that it's going to take to emerge from this public safety crisis that puts our firefighters at risk every day? Can firefighters trust the city to value them as indispensable members of the community? And by extension, can the citizens of Winchester trust the city to provide for our most basic needs with our tax dollars? I've spoken to many firefighters, and frankly, this extends to other city employees. It can be dehumanizing to work for the city of Winchester. It does not feel good to work in an environment where your safety is disregarded and you're put on the same level as a piece of equipment, just a body completely disconnected from personhood. We're better than this. We trust firefighters with our lives. Firefighters should be able to trust us with theirs. That starts with repairing the damage and recognizing that this issue is one of human dignity. The city has the power to remedy this aspect of our public safety crisis, and that is the first step that the ESCI report suggested. Finally, as a second point, when you go to the Winchester Fire and Rescue Department website, you see a graphic that touts all of the good things about the department, like fast response time. That is deceit by omission. The city should update the website so that it includes complete information, only highlighting the positive statistics like response time amount to deceit by omission, and it does not provide the public the information they need to engage as active citizens in our democracy. It's time to be honest about what the ESCI report calls a department in crisis, so that citizens know where their tax dollars have been going, and so that citizens know the state of the department that is supposed to keep them safe. And I'd like to see that done soon. Thanks.
Thank you. The next speaker we have is it Niall Cather? Will.
All right, I guess I'll. Okay, my name is Will Cather.
1 second. Carrie, have you started the
Start.
timer? Thank you. Can you put your timer next to the microphone?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's
So-
what I asked him to do. Can you adjust his mic so it's just a tad closer to him? Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Will Cather, 141 Lambden Avenue, Winchester, Virginia, 22601. I attended Winchester Public Schools from kindergarten through graduating Hanley in 1997. Now I'm an ESOL teacher at Daniel Morgan Intermediate School. That's the side of the building with 5th and 6th graders. When we teachers returned this August, we did so committed to serving our community, and we arrived to our pre-service, which is our preparation time, feeling safe because we had confidence in our district leaders. We had confidence in our plan because the central office publicly presented reasonable safeguards to our staff, students, and families' health. Those safeguards were, 1, they would inform the community of a positive COVID-19 test. 2, they would conduct contact tracing after a positive test. And 3, there would be 6 to 10 students per classroom to allow for 6 feet of distance in schools and on the buses. It took just 1 week of pre-service for the CAO to weaken the confidence Daniel Morgan staff had in district leadership. When one of our teachers tested positive for COVID-19, he's one of the best people you'll meet. Generous, dedicated, gets to work early, leaves late, teaches special education inclusion classes, gives up lunchtime and planning time to mentor kids who people might call difficult. He tested positive for COVID-19 after our first week together in pre-service. He has not returned. In fact, his wife, who also tested positive, is in the hospital, and he was released yesterday afternoon. CAO's response was to notify in a memo the Daniel Morgan Intermediate staff, but not the middle school staff. We share a building, resources, and people. 5 days of working together did not warrant contact tracing either. And today, the first 4 classrooms I entered had 12, 13, and 11 students. Now I know the superintendent brought the star into Daniel Morgan to take pictures of classrooms that fit the plan. And I know our CAO will point to updated CDC guidelines, liability, and privacy laws. But what about doing what we said we would and stewarding the trust between schools and the community we serve? We could still live up to the publicized plan, which is a safer way. We did it in the summer. We need to, and other districts nearby are also doing similar models. Invite into the buildings only our most at-risk students, our special education students, our English learners, and other academically and economically vulnerable students. Fewer students allow the stated plan's 6-foot distance, and to limit further exposure, we must take students' temperatures before they get on the bus. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else here who would like to speak to us this evening? Mary Beth, did we receive any comments online?
No, sir.
Thank you. I will now close the public comments and move on to the consent agenda. Would any member like to remove an item from the consent agenda? In that case, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as is.
Motion to approve.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilor Herbstreit and a second from Councilor Hill. Carrie, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Clark,
Yes.
Ms. Herbstreit,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Ms. McKiernan,
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan,
Yes.
Mr. Veach,
Yes.
Mr. Wiley,
Yes.
Mr. Willingham,
Yes.
and Mayor Smith.
Yes. The next item on the agenda, the next item is the agenda. The first item on the agenda is a motion to establish 2 committees of the Common Council. The Finance Committee with Councilors John Willingham and Judy McKiernan, and serving on the second, which is the Public Safety Committee, Les Veach and Kim Herbstreit. What is the pleasure of the body?
Motion to approve, Wiley?
Second.
I have a motion from Councilor Wiley and a second from Councilor Hill. Is there any discussion? Counselor Sullivan.
Thank you, Mayor Smith. So reviewing what was in the agenda packet, it's a little light for my tastes in terms of some of the outstanding questions we discussed in the last meeting. Specifically, public access to the committees, any committee agendas or minutes and how they would be recorded, the specific powers of the committee, the meeting times of the committee. Are they meeting weekly, bi-weekly? Do they meet ad hoc? Just things of that nature. Basically, some of the details that I need to be able to support this concept. I'm perfectly fine with where we are in terms of we have a finance and we have a public safety committee. I think that's a great start. I'm perfectly content with the members of council who are on the committees. But in terms of how they're actually going to function, I'm at a complete loss and could not and will not support it as presented tonight. So hopefully at some point, those questions will be answered and brought back to council. But, to say tonight that we're going to start having committees, my first question is, well, what are they going to do and how are they going to do it? And without those answers, as I said, I don't think I can get behind this as presented. It's a very good start, and I appreciate the work that's been put into it. I've been here long enough to know that when some of these things come across and they're a little bit incomplete, it tends to cause more problems than it does solutions. And so I would be in favor of maybe slowing this down a little bit and answering some of these questions and then going from there. So thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Sullivan. Counselor Willingham, did you want to address some of those?
Well, sure. As far as the frequency of meetings, obviously, that would be it would most likely be dependent on the agenda, but, whatever comes before those two committees would be similar to what would come before us as a work session. So if there are finance items such as the budget, there may be a requirement to meet weekly. If there's not as much on the agenda, just like on our agendas, if they're lighter, that'll dictate some of those things. But I would say, at a minimum, the intent would be to meet at least monthly to be able to get things onto this regular agenda. It'll be required to have them, publicly noticed and publicly, available minutes, just like we do now. So there's no difference in the work sessions today versus the ones that we would have from a committee perspective. What times we meet and those types of things, I can't answer because obviously we need to get them appointed first. But all the other things that would occur in these committees would occur just like we do as a committee of the whole. So the only difference would be, actually establishing a meeting time and a frequency. But some of that will be dictated by what's necessary on there. Hopefully the intent would be that all the minutes we get out before council has obviously before we would approve anything at this body or at this meeting and plenty of time in advance so people could read. But all those things would be done, in my opinion, once the committees are set up and established. But yeah, full transparency, people can attend, but really be up to the committee on how often they would need to meet based upon recommendations from the staff and city manager.
If I may,
Yes, sir.
I think we need to get that in writing and on the agenda and make it a public record. In both of these discussions that we've had, there's been no supporting documentation as to what the real plan is. There's been no supporting documentation to what the plan has been. There's been discussion, and it's been a good discussion. But as far as the some of the specifics, as I said, it's just not. I'm not comfortable with. We're saying we're going to do something, and that's the intent is there, but when a body like ours functions and does things, we need to have the proper documentation. It needs to be recorded. The public needs to be able to see it, things like that. And maybe I'll defer to whoever wants to answer it, but with only 2 council members present, I don't think you have to notify the public. You should, but I don't think you have to. But our attorney has her hand up, so I'll,
Yes, Melissa.
I just want to address that, Counselor Sullivan. It is a public meeting within the definition of FOIA, so it comes within FOIA, because this is a committee that's been delegated a task by the council. So it's no longer falls under the two-person general rule. It falls under basically the committee becomes the public body. So there has to, every time there's a meeting of a quorum of that public body, the committee, it is a public open meeting, which has to have notice and meeting minutes and open to the public, just like a regular council meeting. So even if there was one person of the committee meeting, it would still be a open public meeting. So
well, I appreciate that answer. That clarifies part of my concern. But with only, 2 people on a committee, does the committee, what are the powers of the committee? Do they review things? Does it have to pass unanimously out of the committee before something happens? With only 2 people on it, you could have a split vote. You could have differing opinions.
If I may, not to cut you off, but the structure of the committees, I don't think they've been established yet. Willingham, have they? Because I'm just speculating here. So will there be some citizens that are able to serve on that committee?
That's obviously up to the body. I mean, I know some other localities do that. We haven't discussed that, but all the public business that comes, the committee is no different than the next meeting we're getting ready to go into. If there's anything passed out of there or not passed, and if it has to be forwarded, then it's going to come here. It has to. It's just like the next meeting we're getting ready to go into, except we're going to segregate some of the items off of that work session into these 2 committees. And some of them will be new added. Obviously, we don't have a public safety committee structured today, so we're not doing a lot of the regular updates and conversations. So there will be different things that will be introduced. But
So if not to cut you off,
sure,
if we pass this tonight, can you have a committee meeting next week?
if we properly notice it and go through all the pieces, but I'd have to talk to the city manager to understand what items would necessarily have been on the next council agenda or that need to come up to be reviewed in a work session. Instead of going to a work session, it would go to that committee meeting.
Understood and agreed. But if you're able to do that next week and we don't have answers to some of the outstanding questions, I don't think we're quite there overall.
I don't know what outstanding questions there are other than when we're going to meet.
Well, does it get passed out of committee? Does it, what happens if do you send stuff? Can we send stuff back to committee to get changed? Things like that.
It's no different than a regular work session that we have today. There's no difference. They're both committees.
No further questions.
Councilor Veach.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Sullivan, we've had committees in the past. We actually had 4 before, and I served on one. And one of the questions that you asked, which may not have gotten an answer, is what's the purpose of the committee? And we've had counselors that work with staff, let's say public safety arena in this situation. They would bring the item and discuss it with the other 2 counselors or whatever we had at the time, in this case 2, and you would try to clean it up and streamline it to save this whole body some work. Now, you don't go out and look for stuff, but when staff brings something that comes under public safety, in this example, they would work with them and clean it up. Let's say the study that's on the firefighters, that may come up, and the committee would look at it. The counselors may make some suggestions or say, hey, that's great as the way it is, and then they would help staff get it ready for us. And then it would help save the whole body some time in the work session, as Councilor Willingham was saying. But to me, that was what the purpose was before, and I'm assuming it is now. But like you say, I understand your angst because it's not documented.
Councilor Sullivan.
I appreciate that clarification, and I think part of this might be that there are council members on the body now that have served on committees, and there are some that have not, and I have not. So my skepticism probably arises from that more than it does anything else.
Okay. So The committees aren't necessarily, it's not written in stone that it should just be two. If you're interested in serving, I'm sure that we could make an adjustment to the resolution to bring back to council for the next one. Would you be interested in serving on one of those?
Again, I mean, sure, but you know, the flip side of it is I could attend the meeting as a public citizen. I mean, so it would accomplish the same thing and get up and speak. I mean, it might not be,
Right.
really, it might not be, you know,
But since you are an elected official, then it would be helpful to have you on that committee as well.
I mean, I think that on both committees, because people are on vacation, you know, they're sick,
Right.
it seems a little light in terms of membership based on the size of the body.
So your suggestion would be 3 than 2?
I would think so.
Okay,
I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
like I said, things happen.
okay,
The more the merrier, basically.
that's fine.
Thank you.
Councilman McKiernan?
I agree with Counselor Sullivan. I think that interactions and synergy is stronger with 3 than with 2. I also think it helps when there is a conflict or seeing things differently to have that third perspective.
Right,
And so I agree that I think it should be moved to 3.
okay. So we will have staff come back with a revised resolution on that. And in the meantime, I'll speak to several counselors to see who are interested in serving on those committees.
You do have a motion and second on the floor. That'll need
I have
to
a
be-
motion and a second one. So did you, Mr. Counselor Wiley, did you make the motion?
Did, Mayor?
Did you want to maybe change it or to,
To amend it?
well, let's, go ahead. You do the motion as is, and then let's see where we go from there. If it needs to be amended, when we go.
Yeah, I think the motion, so it needs to be amended moving forward. We can, based on the criteria for these committees. As so is, you know, the direction of the body. I don't know how else you want me to state it.
I guess, Mr. Mayor, I can make an amendment to request you to add a third member of those 2 committees at your discretion, obviously.
So let's act on the first motion, and then you wanted to make an amendment to,
Well, I can if
Yes.
it sounds like, okay, then I'll make an amendment to his motion to add an additional member to each of the 2 committees to be appointed by you based upon interest by the membership.
okay. And you stand by your second? Counselor.
I had a comment for
Yes.
Councilor Sullivan. if
Yeah,
I could.
okay.
People keep saying that there's a resolution, but there is none in the minutes, so I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with it either until we get that documented anyhow, at least what the structure of the committees is, like we are talking about. Why we can't have that. It's 2, 3, whatever the body decides dynamically, but what their purpose is and what their guidelines are, but we don't even have anything in here. It's just one sentence that we're voting on. And I don't think it should be referred to as a resolution as such, but I'm
So did I
okay.
use the wrong wording on that?
Yeah, I'm okay to
So it's,
maybe approve it pending that come up at the next meeting, satisfactory or something like that. I don't, whatever the
Well,
body wants, but.
If I may, what I think this motion is trying to do is just establish the 2 committees. We can come back with a resolution once we've actually established the committees. This is simply to put this process in motion. That's it. It's not to iron out all the
Right.
details. It is simply say, this is the way we're going to proceed.
so you just made an amendment to his motion,
I need somebody to second it, hopefully.
and we get a second.
Second.
Counselor Sullivan is seconded. So
Go ahead.
Wiley made the motion, Willingham amended the motion, and Counselor
And is
Sullivan,
Counselor Wiley okay with Counselor
are you
Willingham?
okay with the,
I am, just for protocol though, are we supposed to vote on this amendment, correct?
Well, you can have a friendly amendment to your,
That's-
you should make the
Yes.
motion to amend your motion. in light of John. if
Motion
Councilor-
accepted as amended by Counselor Willingham.
You can swap out Wiley for Willingham.
Wow, that was good.
Welcome back, everyone.
Thank you.
And we have a second from Counselor Sullivan. Carrie, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Clark,
Yes.
Ms. Herbstreit,
Yes.
Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Ms. McKiernan,
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan,
Yes.
Mr. Veach,
Yes.
Mr. Wiley,
Yes.
Mr. Willingham,
Yes.
and Mayor Smith.
Yes. Moving on to the next item, it's the first reading and ordinance authorizing an amended memorandum of agreement with Shenandoah University for the capital improvement and management of Bridgeport Field and Rotary Field in the Jim Barnett Park. Mr. Miller, good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. And before I start, welcome to Jim Barnett Park and the Active Living Center. We're pleased to have you and certainly hope that you will find everything to be of your liking and comfort while you're here this evening.
Can you move the microphone closer, please?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
All right, let's try that. All right, Mr. Mayor, members of council, if you recall, we were trying to come up with an amended memorandum of understanding with Shenandoah University to conduct work on 4 athletic fields. And after a considerable amount of conversation with Shenandoah University and the works of our city attorney as well as their counsel, have been able to come up with an amended memorandum of understanding that would address Rotary Field, Bridgeforth Field, Bodie Grimm Field, and Hinkle Harris Field. The proposed ordinance addresses the amendments to the original memorandum agreement previously approved by council, including the revised timetable for the project. Within your packet, you will find Exhibit A, that is revised timetable for the project. Exhibit B, which identifies a temporary construction easement for the contractor, and Exhibit C is an operational agreement. As you review those documents, you'll see that Exhibit A, which is Phase 1, addresses Bodie Grimm and Hinkle Harris fields, and those fields will be known basically as the home fields for Hanley High School. And that work should begin in October of this year, concluding by March of 2021, which would coincide, hopefully anyway, with the athletic field or the baseball and softball seasons for Hanley. Exhibit A, which is addresses Phase 1B, addresses predominantly Bridgeforth and Rotary Fields. That work is anticipated to begin on October of 2021, concluding by December of 2021. And then last is Phase 2 of Exhibit A, and that also addresses Bridgeforth and Rotary, and that's the completion of the entire project by December of 2025. I think it needs to be said that Shenandoah's commitment to this project has not wavered. They've not hesitated, but due to a federal, state, and local emergency dealing with the pandemic, they find it necessary to try to revise the timeline for the project and its completion. I think the information within the new amended MOA addresses the concerns and the questions the council had during the meeting of August the 25th at that work session. But I'd certainly be more than glad to try to respond to any questions the council may have at this time. Also, Mr. Moore, who's Senior Vice President of Shenandoah University, is with us this evening. And I don't know if he has any comments, but I'm sure he would be glad to answer any questions you may have also, sir.
Thank you, Lynn. Are there any questions? Councilor Willingham.
Thanks. I guess, Melissa, a technical question. I mean, the MOA was ever actually executed by both parties, right?
That's correct.
So should we even call it an amended version? Are we only calling it amended because we're telling, I guess, our body approved one and
Correct. The council already approved the MOA.
Right.
So we can't, in my mind, it would be clearer to approve an amended MOA.
Okay. But just to be clear, it's not an executed agreement as of
Correct.
today, right? And the second thing is, when we get this for the second reading, is it possible to get a red line version, just comparing the two versions of the original agreement versus the amended version, so I can just see the differences?
Certainly. I will let you know that there's very few actual substantive changes. It's just mostly to the beginning in the whereas section to explain
Sure.
the reasoning for the changes, and then just tweaking some language to be consistent with the temporary delays to the improvements to the process. But I'd be happy to, I can send one tomorrow to council with the red line changes to show the actual tracks of the changes. There's also some changes to Exhibit C, which is the operational agreement, again, for the same reasonings, that just to make the language consistent with the updated project schedule.
No problem. That'd be great. Thank you. Thanks.
Councilor Beach?
Thank you, Mayor. Glenn, I know one of my issues the last meeting was that the second half, the other two fields were delayed and it didn't have a date. And I think you just mentioned the date when the other two fields would start, Bridgeforth and et cetera. When did you say they would start? October 21?
No, sir, August of 21.
August of 21?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I appreciate SU putting that in. That makes me feel a lot better, and I didn't want an open-ended date, so thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilor McKiernan?
Thank you, Mr. Miller, and I also appreciate those timelines being available in our packet. Last council meeting, we heard of an expressed need by a neighbor for improved lighting. It might seem minor, but if it's your living room that's getting flooded with light, it's a problem. Will the new upgrades in lighting provide for more, for the more modern filtered light that's down facing?
I think that's a good question, Counselor. The upgraded lighting will only be impacted on two fields, and that's Bridgeforth and Rotary. Within the Parks Capital Improvement Plan, there is a request for funding to upgrade the lighting on the other fields, and I'm sure that they would then meet the requirements of the city so as not to infringe on properties outside the property.
Okay, so presently they're outside the limits of what they should be?
Well, yes, the photographs that I saw during the last meeting certainly did indicate that within that particular home, you could see lights from the park. I don't know that we've been able to specifically identify just what field or what attribute it was.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, sir.
Since this is the first reading, there is no action needed. The next item is also a first reading, an ordinance to amend Chapter 26 of the Winchester City Code by adding an article 4 pertaining to public right-of-way and allowing for small cell wireless facilities. Mr. Eisenhower.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have anything new to present on this from the work session, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
Are there any questions for Perry? No, there isn't any question. Thank you, Perry.
That's how I like it. Thank you.
Well, okay. Also, this was the first reading, so no action is needed. The next item is also a first reading, ROW 20-367, an ordinance to vacate and convey a 2,057 square foot portion of the Center Street right-of-way adjacent to 152 Fox Drive. Mr. Humans. Welcome back. And I guess you're going to close this out for the evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Nothing new to report on this item. This is going to have to go through public hearing, obviously, after first reading, and then come back with the viewer's report, presentation, second reading, and action then. So we're just early in the process here.
Are there any questions for Mr. Humans? There is no action needed on this one as well. The next item is a first reading, RZ-20-371, an ordinance to rezone 9.65 acres of land at 654 Fox Drive from low-density residential district to low-density residential district with land unit development overlay district. Mr. Humans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. This was an item that did generate some discussion at the August 25th work session, and since then, particularly today, and especially this afternoon, I received quite a bit of updated or additional information from Mr. Evan Wyatt with Greenway Engineering, the applicant for the Shenandoah Valley request. And it does, from what I've been able to see in the limited amount of time that I've looked it over, appears to address many, if not all, of the questions and concerns that were raised by councilors during the work session. Mr. Wyatt is here, and so if you have questions for me and I'm unable to answer them, perhaps he would be available. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Humans?
The only question I have, Mr. Mayor, Tim, I know there's a number of things that we had requested as part of this application. Just wanted to, any updates you wanted to notify us about, or?
Certainly. Run through these. So they did update the project summary, and specifically they have added the terminology of age-restricted multifamily housing. So that is in the updated project summary, as well as on the 2 pages of the development application, of the development plan, specifically sheet 2 that has the project summary information. So I don't have the updated slides yet. Come back to the, so this page here, that in the fifth bullet down, I guess, it mentions proposed use multifamily villa dwelling that now specifically calls out age restricted. So that attempts to address the concern about what if this becomes a general population type of multifamily. The other thing that I kind of just ran through here, if I can get the, there we go. I have just 3 slides, but there are additional materials that we will be providing to you in advance of next council meeting on the 22nd. They have provided a detailed fiscal impact analysis, notably down at the bottom. They're identifying some savings to the city with regard to this being age restricted. And then they provided additional information. I think Councilman Willingham mentioned the fact that they would be providing water and sewer service to all of the, it's 97 units that are proposed. That's the 39 in the city, plus the units that are in the county. They've specifically addressed expenses that would be derived by the city, coming out to just under $1,000 per person. And so identifying the 66 people who would be estimated to be residing in the 39 units. They're identifying an expense to the city of a little over $65,000. And then on the revenue side, they are estimating that after the project is completed, there'd be $453,690 of revenue, so that the net impact after factoring out the expenses would be $388,615 on an annual basis. So I do have information to provide to you on that. The two other things that they provided, and I don't have slides on this yet. Again, this just came in this afternoon. They have provided a traffic impact analysis. Mr. Perry Eisenach has reviewed this with Mr. Evan Wyatt. The amount of traffic that would be generated on Fox Drive, where the single access point to the public street network is shown, would be a small amount of traffic. I believe in the end, they were looking at an average of 2 vehicles per day per minute during the morning or afternoon peak hours. So a very small increase in traffic. And Mr. Eisenach has confirmed that the existing condition of Fox Drive would be able to handle the additional capacity of this development, plus have capacity after that, and that there were no significant improvements needed at those 2 proposed intersections that are today 3-way intersections at Fox Drive, one being at Pondview Drive, which you can see in the kind of off to the left side of the image there on the west side of Fox Drive. That is where the full access would be into the residential component. And then at Fort Braddock Court, that is where the driveway would come in just inside the city limits and connect to the Phase 2 commercial development. That would be situated over the city-county line there in Frederick County. And then lastly, as far as the general category of update, I believe Councilor Sullivan had questions regarding the stormwater management facilities. May recall that those were shown as fairly large ponds on the plan here. The updated development plan sheets do now show that there would be a smaller amount of land area covered with standing water, that is retained water in the ponds, but they have also outlined what the 100-year storm event would be, which is a larger area, more comparable, particularly for the pond that's shown on the left side as you're looking at this of the entry drive, north side of the road. That would be the configuration of the pond during the 100-year storm event. The water level on a day-to-day basis would be considerably less than that. So that's a quick summary of the updates. A lot of information, but did want to let you know that we have that.
Councilor McKiernan.
I'm sure you're needing some time to pull all this together, so thank you for coming with what you're able to provide today. That particular neighborhood, Fox Drive, Pondview, has very limited walkability, very little, there's not a pocket park within reach. Whittier has a park. There are some nice trails through this development. Will they be open to the public to walk, or will there be restrictions on that? Because I could see that being a nice recreational source for that, for Fox.
Don't know specifically. Perhaps Mr. Wyatt could answer that. I do see that they have a gated entrance here, so I don't know whether the trail connections will be closed off as well.
Mr. Wyatt, did you want to come to the? Yes. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor Smith, members of council. In response to the question, the current campus, I do believe Westminster allows neighboring property owners to utilize the campus for walking. With this specific campus area, we'll double check with them and make sure we have the answer for your public hearing. But if it's in keeping with what they currently allow, then the answer would most likely be yes.
Thank you.
You might want to stay up there.
Sure.
Councilor Veach.
Thank you, Mayor. Tim, how many units are there total expected residents in the city and the county project?
I believe it's 97, is that correct?
It's 97 total units through the entire area you see on the concept plan.
And about how many commercial square feet is there total?
What we're showing in the lower land bay represents about 5,600 square feet of professional medical office and about 7,500 square feet of intergenerational daycare.
With half of it being in the city, Tim, and the other, well, more than half in the county, who would be the first responder on this to either site? I assume it's city on both of them?
So we did have a meeting with Chief Culp, and he has talked with Frederick County. The The first responder, as I understand it, would be the individual jurisdictions, depending upon the address. The 911 calls would be linked to the addresses, and if it's a county address, it would go to County Fire and Rescue. If it's a city address, it would go to City Fire and Rescue.
So how many, I guess I should rephrase that question. How many are in the city then, on the residents?
39.
39, okay, thank you. I just worried that if we have an EMS or a fire call there, if our fire and rescue is already stretched or in a crisis mode, so I'm hoping that maybe we can earmark some of this annual revenue to that cause to help out. Thank you.
Councilor Clark?
Actually, it's along the same lines there. Tim, with the EMS situation at the current facility, is that how they distribute the calls by address?
So the current facility actually physically straddles the city-county line.
Exactly.
And my understanding is that the city, as per the original agreement, does respond to the calls that are in the building, the main building that's attached, that has the apartments both in the city portion as well as the county portion, and the dining rooms and meeting rooms.
Right.
But that the cottages that were built later are handled by Frederick County.
So the city responds to all of the main building calls, and the county responds to the cottages.
That's my understanding, yes.
And you're telling me that the 911 dispatchers are going to look at the physical addresses and have a zip code difference, I guess, between the north and the south end of this new project, and distribute the calls accordingly?
I saw Chief Culp here earlier.
Yeah, he's out in the hallway.
Is he out in the hallway? Perhaps he could answer that question.
I'm just curious. I would be curious to see what the number of, especially rescue squad calls are to a facility of this size with the geriatric population of this age and station.
We did get that information from Greenway Engineering. It is a big number, but recall that the city gets reimbursement on ambulance calls.
Okay.
Since this is coming back to us, can you add that line of questioning in there so that we can get the response for the next meeting?
We will include that with the updated packet, yes.
Thank you. Councilor Wiley?
Just a quick clarification, Tim. That fiscal impact analysis based on the net revenue, is that city only, or is that both city and county?
I believe that's just the city, but I need to double check that. Now, the water and sewer revenues would be for all 97 units because they're being served by city water and sewer. But otherwise, I believe that the estimate, but again, Mr. Wyatt could probably clarify that.
The fiscal impact analysis that was updated is similar to most of the fiscal impact analysis reports you've received for other PUD overlays. It takes a look at the comprehensive city budget. It discounts the education, but not the debt service for schools. And then it utilizes a formula to figure out relative burden calculations and population costs. And that's how you get to your per person impact, if you will. And that number, the $65,000, is specifically relevant to the 39 units in the city and those residents. The remainder of the information, the revenue side, the $80,000 that was provided previously, that's specific only to the 39 residential units in the city, as is the projected for personal property revenue based on the vehicles. And then the water and sewer are comprehensive for the entire campus because the city will be receiving those revenues. And then there's also a one-time revenue for the tap fees. And the one thing I would also note about the fiscal impact analysis, we also deducted what the city would have received for the 26 by right single-family homes. So for example, the $116,000 for the one-time water and sewer tap fees was actually a higher number, but then you subtract out what you would have gotten from the by right, and it's a net positive at that line. So the information, when you receive it, it's provided in a pretty detailed report, and it explains how we step through it. So hopefully that will become more clear when you have a chance to review the whole document.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. I just want to point out that that's, according to our budget, it's just a little bit over a cent savings on a yearly basis based on our overall budget. So I want you guys, everybody to take note of that. It's a benefit to keep our costs down because they're rising every year, and I think that's something certainly would be of asset to us moving forward. Thank you.
Were there any more discussion? Since this was the first reading, there is no action taken. Thank you, Mr. Humans. Thank you, Mr. Wyatt.
Thank you, Mayor Smith.
The next item we have on the agenda is a request of Habitat for Humanity for Winchester for subdivision approval of 4 new lots at 405 West Lane, zone limited high-density residential district with portion zone historic Winchester district overlay. Mr. Humans. And by the way, is it still the Blue Ridge Habitat?
Yeah, I need to read a statement.
Councilor Herbstreit.
Yeah, thank you. I hereby disclose with respect to the following transaction that I have a personal interest in the transaction because I provide services to an individual, business, or government agency that is the subject of the transaction or may realize a reasonably foreseeable direct or indirect benefit or detriment from the transaction. The name of the individual, business, or government agency is Blue Ridge Habitat for Humanity, and the salary, fringe benefits, and any other benefits paid or provided by the agency exceeds $5,000. Thank you.
Carrie, can you make an adjustment to the name on there for Blue Ridge Habitat for Humanity? Mr. Humans.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Nothing new to report on this. Recommend approval. That was the
Is there
recommendation
any-
from Planning Commission.
Councilor Veach.
Thank you, Mayor. Tim, I talked to a rep from the Habitat, and citizens, when I'm going door to door, and the ones that are, when we talk about market rate housing, a lot of people tend to think of rental right away. But a lot of the citizens I talked to that were interested in it wanted home ownership. And talking to the Habitat rep, these are going to be about 165,000. And I think that's a great fit for our need, especially with the low interest rates right now, that they can get into their own home ownership. So I think this is a great project, and I'm supportive of it. Thank you.
I'll entertain a motion if there's no further discussion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
I think Wally has you beat. So
Oh, I did? Thanks, Mayor. Second.
I have a motion by Councilor Beach and a second by Councilor Wiley. Carrie, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Ms. Herbstreit.
Recusing myself.
Mr. Hill.
Yes.
Ms. McKiernan.
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan.
Yes.
Mr. Veach.
Yes.
Mr. Wiley.
Yes.
Mr. Willingham.
Yes.
And Mayor Smith.
Yes, and that motion is forwarded. I'll now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Carrie, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Ms. Herbstreit.
Yes.
Mr. Hill.
Yes.
Ms. McKiernan.
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan.
Yes.
Mr. Veach.
Yes.
Mr. Wiley.
Yes.
Mr. Willingham.
Yes.
And Mayor Smith.
Yes, we are now adjourned, and we'll reconvene in work session in a few moments. I would like to call to order the September 8, 2020 work session of the Common Council. Carrie, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Clark.
Here?
Ms. Herbstreit. Here. Mr. Hill. Ms. McKiernan. Here. Mr. Sullivan.
Here.
Mr. Beach.
Here.
Mr. Wiley.
Here.
Mr. Willingham.
Here.
And Mayor Smith.
Here. The next item on our agenda is public comments. Now is the time on our agenda for public comments. If there's anyone here tonight that wishes to speak, you have 3 minutes. Carrie, did anyone sign up on the sheet?
No, sir.
Mary Beth, were there any comments received online?
No, sir.
There being none, I'll close the public comments and we'll move on to the agenda. The first item on our agenda is a memorandum agreement with the United Way to distribute CARES Act funds for utility and rent mortgage assistance presented by Mary Blow. Good evening, Mary.
Hi. Good evening, Mayor and members of council.
How are you?
Good. How are y'all doing tonight?
Good.
Good. What I have before you this evening, it's a memorandum of agreement between the City of Winchester and the United Way. We've talked the past several meetings, and Mr. Eisenach and Ms. Broadstreet has brought it up for 2 items, rent and mortgage assistance, and then our utilities assistance. Utilities would be water, gas, and electric. So as we talked as an internal staff about how we could accomplish this, we kind of met and decided that it was much easier to use an external group than do this on our own. It's not in our wheelhouse to distribute these funds. With the absence of a housing authority, many localities utilize nonprofits to handle the distribution of these funds. So we felt like a perfect match would be the United Way. The amounts we have in front of you in the agreement for utility assistance would be $300,000, and that's a $2,000 max per household, and rent and mortgage assistance in the amount of $100,000. That'd be a $3,000 max per household. When we looked to the United Way, it seemed like they had a very seamless program that they utilized the Valley Assistant Network referrals. So it'd be really difficult for just one individual nonprofit to handle all of this money at one time and get it distributed fairly efficiently and quickly. So we liked their concept that they had. United Way has already been following the process with other CARES money for rent, utility, and other needs. So we felt like this was certainly in their wheelhouse and something that they fortunately have agreed to assist us with if it's your all's prerogative to choose to let them do so. I have 2 representatives here tonight, Jennifer Hall and Nadine Patinga here to answer any questions that you might have or any more for me. I'm happy to answer those questions as well.
Are there any questions for Mary tonight? Councilor Beach.
Thank you. Just 2 quick questions to confirm it, Mary. One, the funds have to be used by the end of the calendar year.
Yes, sir.
And the last is the assistance will be paid directly to the provider, whether it's a landlord or services.
Yes, sir. Yes, as well, directly to the utility or the landlord or mortgage company.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Herbstreit.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mary. Let's see. I have a couple of questions. One, I know Perry had done a presentation, I don't know if it was the last meeting or the meeting before. I think what was the outstanding utility amount? Was it $120-some thousand?
I believe Perry's, my misspeak, let me know, it's about close to 400.
Yeah, it's about 400,000.
Oh, it's a bit, okay.
Yes.
Okay, and so that might help answer my second question. So the breakdown, 300,000 for utilities and then 100,000 for rent and mortgage, is that, I'm guessing that there was some communications with United Way and kind of the requests that you guys are getting, and those numbers will suffice for what the needs are. So you wouldn't want to flop it the other way or put more into mortgage and rent. I guess that relates to the utilities as well. I just want to make sure that we have the numbers allocated in a way based on what the needs are.
Who are you asking that question to?
I guess Mary,
I felt like I was very comfortable with the 300,000 based on our historical data of the current delinquencies outstanding. The rent and mortgage assistance, that would serve, if we did the max 33 and a third households, certainly if Nadine comes back and says, hey, Mayor, you guys really have a more need. I don't know the need of a mortgage yet because we haven't hit our second half of real estate collections. I would know that deeper dive into that, but we haven't gotten there. So if Nadine says, hey, Mary, that there's a big need, I may be coming back for this body to ask for more if necessary.
Okay, yeah. And then I guess, thank you for that, Mary, that's helpful. I guess then, I'm wondering of those $400,000 or whatever that people are behind right now, is there going to be some effort to kind of pair up and make sure that those folks have the information of United Way and Dan so that they can get connected to the support that would be out there?
We will. We'd post something on our website, and I know the United Way already has a very seamless, I'll check their site too, and they have a pretty seamless ability to get there, and we'd also refer them there as well from our website.
Okay.
If this is approved.
If I could, I'll add to that. We are going to put some information in the utility bills that start going out to everybody, so I think that will be another good way to let folks know.
Okay, thank you, yeah.
Councilor Sullivan, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Smith, and thank you guys for the presentation. Kind of more of a, maybe a little technical question, but I believe there's currently a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures, correct?
No, not as of today.
It ends today?
It is today.
Okay. Hypothetically, let's say somebody comes in and they're 3 months behind on rent, and United Way, or, they receive the grant money, and, that puts them, I don't know how they're going to be allocated, or, the specifics aren't very clear, but let's say that they get enough money to pay 2 months of rent. Do they still get evicted? I mean, do they, does the landlord, you know what I mean? I mean, you're getting into some...
Sure, that's a great question. We'll do and make every effort to bundle this with other funding if that is the case. There is some funding that we're working with People Inc. They have the RMRP funding. So we will also be looking for other funding sources in those situations.
Okay.
Our housing counselors also do a good job of working with landlords to see if they're willing to help the tenant get up to where they need to be and maybe reduce a couple of months' rent and be lenient. So we'll make every effort to make sure that they are completely up to date and pair funding where we can find other sources as well.
Okay, I appreciate that, because I could foresee some weird situations where
Yes.
it we certainly want to help them as much as possible, but
Right.
it could just be a lot of strange questions could come up.
Yeah,
so.
and we fielded already through our COVID-19 relief fund a lot of these kind of strange situations, and we've really been encouraging people to stay up to snuff on their rent if they can, rather than leaning on that moratorium on eviction. So we want to continue to do that and help people find work and help for them to stay current. So yeah, every case is a little strange, but our housing counselors do a good job of trying to figure out where we can go for that.
So that's a good point. So when they come in, it's the whole approach. Why don't you can't pay your rent? You need a job. You help find a job and things like that. So it's not just one aspect of what might be the problem.
Yeah, and that's what I hope appealed to Mary when we spoke, was that we're going to try and address the family as a whole unit, not just rent and utilities, but there might be childcare issues. There might be other issues there. So we have a lot of other resources and the knowledge of those resources that we can send those families. So, and that's kind of that whole concept of approach.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Councilor Willingham.
Thanks. I think Kim actually emailed this question today, but I don't think I saw a response. But it says in here that no administrative fee shall be paid to the United Way, but they're doing a fair amount of work. Is that are they doing it voluntarily, or is this just not allowed under the CARES Act?
I think it'd be difficult. It would have to be a necessary expense related to COVID relief.
Okay.
Could it be? Possibly, but it would be very difficult for documentation. My preference would be no administrative
Sure.
fees.
Just they're taking on a fair amount of work that we're not having to do. Not that I think they're trying to make any money off of it, but I know that if there's a way to offset their costs, obviously they're probably hiring people, doing all these other things. So if there's a way to somehow, again, I'm not, and they're not obviously going to, you're nonprofit, they're not trying to make a bunch of money off of it, but there's a way to help offset the cost of administrating this. I think it would be prudent for us to find that out. I think it would be of interest, at least to me, and maybe some others here. The other question that I had was, so let's, this is, they only have until the end of the year, right? So that's, we have 4 months left. And so obviously that's a fair amount of work that they have to do from now until then. If we get to the end and there's surplus funds, how do I ask this question? Can we, can they, in the United Way, apply utility funds to past due accounts automatically, or how could that potentially work if there's excess funds that they've not been able to distribute directly on the behalf of a family that potentially could have, maybe they didn't know to apply or whatever the case may be? Do we know what the answer to that is?
Right, as long as it's COVID related, and you're saying between the 100 and 300, let's say we needed more.
Yeah, no, I'm even
systems
saying,
or-
let's just say this amount that we're allocating tonight.
Mhm.
Let's say there's $100,000 left in the utility bucket in November 28th, and we don't think we can spend it all by the end. Can we ask them, or can we suggest, or can they, on their own behalf, suggest that they go ahead and apply it to people who are past due that didn't apply or didn't know how to, or whatever the case may be? Are they allowed to make those direct payments on the behalf of somebody?
They can.
Okay.
Certainly, I would just, Nadine, would certainly want to touch base if I got documentation for our auditors for that. But as long as it fits within that time frame,
Okay.
in terms of for COVID expenses, that'd be no problem.
Okay. Well, that would just be a way to benefit these folks
Right.
rather than coming out of all this, not knowing about it, and especially if we have actually, a surplus of funds. The last thing I'll ask is, thank you all, by the way. I appreciate your assistance in this very much. If we could just get an update on the funds, just as we're going through this process, just so that we know, because I think it would be helpful for us to be able to at least, maybe through the finance committee, or whatever process we do, it would just be helpful, I think, for this body to know, what's outstanding, what's being spent, so that if we need to, ask staff to redouble efforts, or if there's another way we need to carve this stuff out, I just think it would be helpful for us to know. So,
Sure,
Molly,
we were
what
just
process?
updating that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Celeste brought one last meeting.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about just doing it once a month.
I think that's great.
If I could come
Yeah.
next
Yeah.
meeting, that'd be
Okay.
helpful.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Councilman McKiernan.
Thank you, Nadine and Jennifer, for being here and for offering to do this. I would suspect, and I might be wrong, but through the CARES Act, if they were to well document and like an admin assistant's hours towards this project, that might be reimbursable in terms of their work. If they could really pin down that they're working only on COVID, that's the problem. How can we dovetail, this is for you, Perry, a payment plan process, which I know staff is working on. Can we dovetail that with, say, okay, we've worked out a payment plan for you, but you can also get funding over here? I'm just wondering, how can we do both of these processes at the same time? Because it's going to take both to help alleviate this debt.
Sure. Right now at the General Assembly, they're still
Yes,
talking
Okay.
about a possible bill that deals with repayment plans.
okay,
And so until we know what they do with that, it's a little premature to guess.
right.
But I think you have a very good point. We want to combine these two things together.
Right.
And so we may just need to wait a couple of weeks.
So just keep an eye on the General Assembly.
Yeah,
You
correct.
can do that.
Is there any other discussion? Excuse me.
Mayor, do you need a motion?
Just to direct the city manager to sign this MOA.
So what is the pleasure of the body?
Motion for the city manager to sign this MOA before.
Second.
Second.
I have a motion, and who was the second?
Hurstbrook.
Councilor Hurstred. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? that moves forward.
Thank
Thank
you all.
you. Yeah, have a good evening. The next item we have is the Fire and Rescue Department Quarterly Report presented by Hayden Cope, Interim Fire and Rescue Chief. Good evening, Chief.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, councilors, City Manager. Pleasure to be here in person, as this is my first visit to the group as fire chief. I've been on the job for 98 days now, and I can say that on behalf of myself and a very capable staff, we've been very busy. And this has been both a rewarding and productive experience for myself, the staff, and the community. The first time I gave a quarterly report on the ESRI master plan study was on June 23rd, and this is the second quarterly report that I've been asked to give to the council. I'm just going to hit a couple of the highlights. I guess we'll have that here in just a second, so I'm glad I'm not working the buttons. Well, that's coming up. I will say that you probably have the slides there with you, I hope. I'll discuss just the first bullet, if you don't mind. If I
No,
just
go right ahead,
Okay.
please.
The first thing that we worked on is staffing, and I believe that is a critical and most important issue for us to address for the Fire and Rescue Department. And effective last Saturday, September the 5th, we increased our staffing from one person, which was the driver-only syndrome that everybody's familiar with, to 2 people. And that took quite a bit of work, meeting with our employees, most importantly, to develop recommendations, evaluate different solutions and opportunities to make sure that the impact on our employees wasn't so severe that it caused too much more trouble than we were solving. So we've had many station meetings, visits. We met with staff met with personnel, and in the long run, we did come up with the solution of using the overtime to work additional hours to eliminate the driver only from point forward. So I'm very proud that that has taken place. It also achieves one of the city's strategic plans to have 2 personnel fire apparatus by the fall of 2020, goal number 3. And the long-range plan for resolving the staffing issue to have adequate staffing, which is not just 2 people on a fire truck, but 3, as recommended by the plan itself, will come back through the budget process to the council in future budget processes. You'll be hearing more from me and staff on that. The other thing that for staffing that the ESCI study recommends was associated with the workload that the fire marshal's office has. And as a matter of fact, we went through a process in the last few weeks, and today we have offered a promotion to fill that position to an internal fire and rescue person to add the second person back to our fire marshal's office staff. That was a vacant position prior, so that'll help with some of their workload. The second bullet there is in regards to planning. And some of the things that the study mentioned that we need to do is to work with the volunteer fire companies to work on a memorandum of understanding. I've got one of the volunteer company presidents from Shawnee is on a small committee with myself and Patrick from the city manager's office, and we have worked on a draft that's parallel to the MOU that the volunteer companies are familiar with through the EMS fee for billing that they help to write. So it'll look just like that and should be very familiar to them. So that's being worked on right now. And also one of the study recommendations was in regards to fire apparatus maintenance and repair. We've had Perry meet with them, meet with the chiefs. We've got one company that's going to try it out, we think. And so we're working on that to see how that goes. So it's being worked on. We also are participating in a grant through the Virginia State Fire Chiefs and the International Association of Fire Chiefs to work on a volunteer recruitment and retention initiative, and that's just in the beginning stages of getting started on that. I have met with one of the volunteer companies, a small committee that's trying to enhance and develop and retain volunteers that come to that company. So we've had several meetings with those folks. The next bullet is about benefits. I guess didn't make it. You're going to hear more about PTO here in just a few minutes, the next presentation, but that's been addressed and is ready for implementation. And would you like for me to wait? until
Chief, can you hold on a second?
Sure.
Can we get the PowerPoint up? Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem.
Mayor, while we're waiting, can I ask a question for one of the bullet points?
Certainly.
Thanks for being here, Chief Culp. Good seeing you. In bullet point 1, when we're talking about the driver-only response, obviously, you mentioned hiring. Is there anything else that we should be looking at or that you would recommend? I don't know if there's, I'm making this up, but software programs or things like that to look at the amount of calls and which stations are responding, because I know some of that could potentially just be a matter of staffing at each of the different stations and looking at that. So obviously, I probably understand that we need to increase staffing over time. Is there anything else that we're doing as part of that to couple with?
Yes. Yes, sir. I have met with the GIS coordinator, Kyle Schweizer, and in fact, I've gotten him to do a presentation to the volunteer fire, volunteer chiefs and presidents meeting group, and also to our battalion chiefs to share. We're looking at some of the data, where our call volumes are, and where there's stronger densities of calls. One of the things that the study also points out that our EMS calls and our EMS units are already running, I would not say beyond capacity, but they're running pretty high. There's some formulas that are in there, and so they indicate that we need to look at adding even more EMS response or evaluating how we do EMS response in the future. But in terms of any other software associated with evaluating how we do our staffing, I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, I'm just curious if there's a way to find.
Yeah.
I think you've kind of done it a little bit, identifying patterns. Are we, are they in one side of the city, or do we have enough staff in that side of the city that seems to have more calls? I think it'd just be helpful. Obviously we do need to staff, potentially have staff increases. It would just be helpful, I think, as well to say, there's data behind where we're going to place these folks long term.
Yes, sir. I think that it would be prudent as a part of further development in our strategic analysis of fire and rescue in the city to look at strategic deployment of our units to see if they are all in the right places, or if we need to be looking at adjusting that.
Okay. Then
Okay.
just one more, if I may, on the same note.
Okay.
You also mentioned EMS fees, which I don't remember that we've seen an update to those in multiple years, or at least we used to get updates on the rates and what we could charge. Mary Beth, I don't know if that's something that we could bring back to look at in a
Are you
future
referring
council.
to the revenue recovery monies?
Yes.
Okay. We can get you that.
I know we did a report, but I think it's been several years. So I don't know if we're charging what we could be. Obviously, all that flows back to the Fire and Rescue Department. If there's a way to get an update on where we are with that and what we're allowed to charge versus what we're charging, I think that'd all be great information.
Okay.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, now that we do have the presentation up, if you want to
Okay.
continue.
Okay. So I'm on the bottom bullet there. So PTO is something that the city elected to go with for our city employees, and it was delayed here for fire and rescue. We have identified, a resolution for a concern, and that was with one of the factors on how leave is converted between the 40-hour work week and the 48-hour work week, and I'm sure Paul is going to cover a little bit more of that in the next presentation. And the other item that has also been a hot topic in fire and rescue is what's called unequal paychecks. And we did have one of the chiefs, and we've been working with Celeste in finance and we're constantly looking at different opportunities or solutions to address that issue. And we're hopeful that maybe we have come up with one that will resolve that. We've gone out and kind of ran it up the flagpole to the fire stations late last week to each shift. And the indications are, pretty positive head nods, so we'll be evaluating that, and hopefully that will be getting resolved sooner than later. The next slide. There was a recommendation about our policies and reviewing all the policies. So one of the first things that we did was, and you've got a sample of one there, I know you can't read it, but we looked at the format for our policies before we went through this complete revision policy. And a couple things that we came up with is to connect our policies to a risk management and safety component. That's what the low risk, low frequency up there in the top goes to a program that we teach within the Fire and Rescue Department. And we also added a responsible custodian for each one of the policies, so that if there's a question about who in the department's responsible for it, and we added a review and revision date to each policy. So we've done several of those policies, and we're well on our way to reviewing all of our policies. Also, along those lines, a recommendation was about preparing our officers for professional qualifications, and we have developed a new officer development program that has been implemented. Another recommendation was in regards to our quality management program. And all EMS agencies in Virginia are required to do that. We had one before. In fact, it's been used as a model in other jurisdictions. It was in a policy. It was just not in a format that was available apparently to the reviewer. So we have formalized that into one of our policies now, and it will include all the aspects that are required by the law and that were recommended by the study. For training, there was many recommendations listed in regards to training that are in your report there. But I would say that we have an annual training plan that does encompass all the facets that are expected of our people, and it's documented. That was also listed as an ISO study review that the ESCI folks picked up. Prior to ESCI, we had purchased software, Target Solutions, and all of our training is now documented in that software that we use for other things in fire and rescue as well. So we've got a very good platform for tracking all of our training. So that will also help us when we do a future ISO review as well. And there was also a mention about pre-plans. We are doing a pre-plan program has been developed where fire and rescue folks go out, survey places, and update pre-plans to show where safety hazards and utilities and things like that are. We have done some pre-plans, however, that program did get stalled due to the amount of time we didn't want with COVID going out into the public. We were trying to limit that for a little while. But we have a program in place, and we'll get back on that as soon as we deem it a good time to do so. The last item that I have to report to you on is in regards to a little bit of a command staff restructuring. We have reclassified an existing deputy chief's position to assistant chief, and I believe that makes that rank commensurate with the expectations that we have of that position. So that improves our communication and contact and helps with some other expansion of our supervisory and administrative responsibilities, mainly with dealing with the folks out in the field, the fire and rescue folks. So I also discovered that we actually have had 2 assistant chiefs in the past, and that was adjusted, but I'm real happy with that move and the work that the 2 chiefs have gotten done to date. So with that, that's all I had to present. I'd be certainly happy to answer any questions.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Where did the one person only on the truck come from in the first place?
I think what happened, and you could go pretty far back, and there's several studies that have been done trying to fix it. But what happened was there used to be 3 people assigned to each station, and they would pick whichever call came first. If it was a fire, all 3 would hop on a fire truck. If it was an EMS call, 2 or 3 of them would hop on an ambulance. Well, in fact, 2 would hop on and 1 would stay back. And if they take the call, and we're pretty blessed here in the city that we've got a wonderful healthcare facility pretty quick. They can be there on the scene quickly, to the hospital quickly, and they return quick. So on the way back, they get a call, they take the fire truck, go to the fire with the other 2 people, meet up there. They got their gear with them. Well, as you know, in the study documents, our calls for EMS have gone through the roof. And so now we have 3 medic units, well-trained people. They do a great job. Our statistics show that we're twice the national average of survival for cardiac arrest here in the city. Something really to be proud about. Well, as those calls for EMS continue to climb, it was all the time 2 people on the medic unit and 1 person left on the fire truck. And that's where the driver only on the fire truck came from. And we just have made a few attempts to get staffing back up to fix that. And I think economic conditions have adjusted the ability to hire folks and get them on board. And so that's how we got to where we are. So.
Thank you. Councilor Hurst.
Thank you, Chief. I would be interested in hearing more. You had mentioned about the density of calls and working with the GIS person. I think that once you have those maps, it would be interesting to kind of see what you find from that. So I'd welcome the opportunity to look at those. I guess the other thing is, you know, I just want to say that, you know, I think we're all working hard to really try and figure out how can we ensure that, you know, our firefighters and EMS are, you know, compensated and taken care of, and that we're listening to them and we're responding and incorporating changes where they need to be made. I know I've talked with several people about the whole equal pay check, and it sounds like this really simple thing that just can be done, but it's not. It's a really, really complicated thing. And so I just appreciate your leadership and your working with fire and rescue and EMS and the volunteers to really figure out how do we move forward on this. I think we fully expect at some point in the future here, there will be budget coming from you all to, I mean, we're going to have to make some tough decisions. I know one of the challenges is just with our teachers is being able to be competitive with our folks surrounding us. And so I think that, you know, all of this is going to continue to come forward. And I mean, I think that we're all here wanting to support and make sure that our fire and rescue are, you know, that they're here and that we're supporting them and that they're supporting our community. So thank you for your leadership and for the work you've put in.
Thank you.
If there's no further
I have a
questions.
question.
Oh. Councilor Willingham.
Thanks. Chief, I'm just curious from your, you know, outside view, you came into a difficult situation. Any feedback you'd want to give us from where you got here day 1 to where you've been here for 98 days, I think you said. So just curious, any reflections, anything that we should be thinking about other than what you brought to us? Obviously, you've been visiting the stations. I've had, you know, conversations with a couple of folks as well. So I'm curious to hear any feedback that this body should know or want to or should know while we've got the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you very much. I would say that I am truly believe that we're making good progress. I certainly read the study. I've lived nearby. I was retired, keeping an eye on what was going on here, and I'm glad that I came. I'm glad for the tremendous staff that are staffing our fire and rescue office and stations. And as the counselor said, I think one of the big challenges that's going to be facing us as a community is keeping all of our public safety officers here, fire and rescue and police. There is a lot of competition in the area. It's stiff. We're looking at every angle, whether it's benefits, hours, training, equipment, our hiring processes, our recruiting tools, where we can get new people, how we can hire people who are trained. But then we're kind of doing the same thing. But so it's a very multifaceted challenge. And I certainly appreciate all of the support that the council and city leadership, all the folks that are sitting in the back row there, give to me and to our team. And to have that support makes this an extremely rewarding experience.
Councilor Sullivan?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief. Kind of as a follow-up to Councilor Willingham's question, I noticed in the report that I received, I think it was in the manager's review, we have 17 or 18 recruits in the most recent class.
We had 6, sir.
Oh, we had 6. Okay. What is our, in your opinion, if you had to guess, our timeline to get us from where we are to where we're fully staffed?
Well, that's a great question because there's challenges with finding them, recruiting them, enticing them to come here, and getting them through our hiring process, which has 6, 7, 8 steps, and then having the instructors and the facilities to train them. One of the things that we are looking at doing is doing joint schools with Frederick County, so that's a better use of resources with that. But the challenge goes to my staff, and I ask them every day and kind of maybe give them pains about asking them that very question, so that the question is, as soon as we can find them, pull them in and train them, they're ramping up to give them the training and not only get them trained, but then there's like a intern program before they're actually kind of checked out to ride. And so I would say that the next 12 to 18 months are going to be a critical time period for us to step up.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's no further questions. Thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you, sir.
And we look forward to the next report.
Look forward to being here.
You have a nice evening.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the City of Winchester's Comprehensive Employee Management System recommendations, presented by Paula Knopfinger. Hello, Paula.
Hello, good evening.
Long time no see.
Last but not least, right?
Yes.
Mayor Smith, councilors, good evening. Nice to see everyone. As you know, we're here to look at some recommended changes to our SIMS policies. And briefly, the recommendations are, the first one is to our leave policy. The amendments will include our fire and rescue department employees into our current PTO structure with medical leave. This also continues for our folks in the field, the higher accrual levels for them, both the current employees and the future employees. It will also include our fire and rescue folks into the city-provided short-term disability benefit. The recommendations to our safety policies haven't been reviewed for years. So what we're recommending is to remove the current ones, replace them with the couple that are being recommended. So at the city level, our safety policies will be in compliance and modern and up to date. The other policy is our cell phone policy. As you currently know, we have some positions that require cell phones. Right now, the city provides cell phones to our folks. These amendments will allow the employee to choose whether they want to continue with the city cell phone or use their own personal cell phone and receive a stipend. And then finally, we are recommending to amend our dress code policy. The code will include public work events and then allow for casual Fridays as appropriate. So that's kind of the highlights of the changes. I'll be happy to try and answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Paula? Councilor Willingham.
Thanks. Paula, I'm just curious to know why the change or why are we migrating away from city-owned phones to potentially allowing personal phones? When I was reading about that, I've just known a lot of companies would prefer control for IT security and things like that. Maybe that's a different question for a different
Yeah,
group,
I
but
have Tyler
I'm just curious.
jump in. I think a lot
Bring
of
your
it,
own devices has sort of been popular, and then it got less popular as malware and stuff, so I'm curious.
So it ebbs and flows, obviously. The thing with us is we're trying to ultimately save some money. For each of our city cell phones, we probably pay on average $50 a phone. In addition, there are licensing expenses for us to manage these phones. Anything that we do as far as access to email, so on and so forth, that's all password protected as it is. And as far as anything above and beyond that, we would heavily scrutinize what would and would not be accessible on a personally owned phone as far as city resources. We would require every personal cell phone that would be participating in this program to have a password protection on their device. If they would not comply or do not want to comply, then they're not eligible to participate in the program. We would also require them to tell us, you know, if your phone's missing, broken, so on and so forth. Hey, let us know. We can remotely wipe any city delivered resource on these cell phones at that time, remotely. We don't need to have access, physical access to the phone.
And so are these employees just representing that they have all these security measures you're suggesting, or is there an actual check?
We would check. We would physically touch the phones. We would ensure compliance, and we would probably do periodic audits as well. This is not something that we would take lightly, and if we were not comfortable with the employee having this amenity that we were offering, then we would simply not authorize their participation. It would require approval from the IT or IIS department as well as the city manager for enrollment.
Okay. My other question, if I may. So, Paula, I'm assuming that the change in the PTO for the fire and rescue has had participation from chief and the rest of the staff. Anything there that you want to update us on that you feel is...
when first Chief called, you're more than welcome to join in, but when he first came on board, that was one of the first things he brought to my attention was, let's look at the PTO and see what we can do to get it in for fire and rescue. So we worked with his staff, and then he had meetings with all of his shifts at all the departments to get feedback. So it was another long process where everyone was involved.
Right. So we feel now this policy is one that's has got as much participation and positive recommendations as we can get. Is that fair?
I believe so.
Okay. Thank you.
Council Beach.
Thank you, Mayor. Couple of things. One, on the casual Fridays, in fact, somebody spoke to me last week about this, that they know that it was introduced in the business world years ago, but now it seems like it's become casual all week or all the time. Do you have any fear of that? And if so, why?
So the policy is written so that it is for just Fridays. And of course, the department directors and the supervisors have the final say on any kind of appropriateness of dress in the workforce. So I would rely on department heads and the managers to enforce that also. So I think we need to try it and see how it goes. And then if we see there are issues, we can address them.
Okay. And last, follow up on Council Willingham's question about the PTO. What seems to be implemented seems to be exactly what the fire and rescue has asked for over the last year and a half, 2 years. We're just now getting to it. That's disappointing. I think we could have got to it earlier, but I do like that it's finally being adopted. So thank you.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, Paula will bring these changes back as a resolution at the next regular meeting. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Tyler. The next item on our agenda is our executive session. So we will be, I'll make the motion and then we'll ask everyone to leave the room. And then we'll have all audio and visual turned off, please. It's a motion to convene an executive session pursuant to section 2.2-3711A1 for the discussion of the hiring, appointment of specific public officers, appointees, or employees. The subject matter is to discuss the appointment of specific public officials to or resignation from certain city boards, commissions, and committees, including but not limited to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, School Board, Tourism Board, and the Local Emergency Planning Committee. Is there a motion?
So moved, Wiley.
Second.
Carrie, would you please call the roll? Was that second from Councilor McKiernan?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Ms. Herbstreit?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. McKiernan?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Mr. Veach?
Yes.
Mr. Wiley?
Yes.
Mr. Willingham?
Yes.
And Mayor Smith?
Yes, we are now in executive session.